Hello, Blake Bruning here from Trinity Whip Company, and I happen to have on hand right now a couple Indiana Jones whips, and I haven't had a Terry Jacka in a while, but this is one of his J series, and it's an 8-foot, and then here's a really nice Joe Strain 10-foot, and I believe they are, let's see, one, two, these are both 12 plat, of course, being a J series. And the strain is too. And I'm really thinking by looking at this model, because the specs it hits and how thin he got it cut, I'm pretty sure this is actually one of Joe's 28th anniversary models. But I could be wrong. Could just be his Raider specs, you know. Normally, Indiana Jones diameter, you know, they try to say Raiders is under 22 millimeters at the transition, you know, and we're looking right at 22, which is really good. I think I almost a little below the handle right there. Yeah, it's about 22 or so. So, you know, that kind of hits spec, but, you know, it can be from 22 to 24, you know, unless you're trying to hit a certain spec, variation in the hide, how much you might have split or not split, thicker cowskins, you know, there's some variation. But this is a good example of some of the differences. You can just see, I'll just do some measurements real quick. And I just kind of want to make this video to kind of explain binding, which was kind of a request, although I think he really wanted a whip maker's perspective on how to bind, but that might be another day. But look, it's 26 right there. It's 26.6 right here, you know, and here at the lower part of the handle, we're looking at 19, 19.8, 24.49. The heel diameter is a little different too. This is 40, 72, and this one is about, you know, 42. Now, Joe's heel diameter, you know, depending on how fat this is and where he puts his lead on it, it could also be a couple millimeters thicker too, you know, that's all possible. But Terry Jacka made the whips for the Kingdom of Crystal Skulls, and I believe that's why he made the J series. It was for, you know, if you wanted to get his Indiana Jones model whip, he called it the J series. And Terry Jacka was known for his binding. Now, this Indiana Jones model that he did is actually an 8-inch spike, and let's see if I can show by pulling this little, you can see that it moves. I don't know if you can see it, but it moves around here. So this, although it will, if you hold it up, it's a stick for most of it. That is not actually a longer heel spike than the other Raiders. It is an 8-inch nail spike. I believe he uses that, or the equivalent of it. I believe he does use a nail spike because he was keeping it for how the movie wanted it. But with this, he has strong binding, very strong binding up there. And a lot of that is what gives him the illusion of a longer, more Australian style handle, even though it still has an 8-inch spike. Now, binding is not necessary. Binding is when you take sinew and you wrap it around strong, and it almost creates a sleeve in itself. I mean, there'll be no space in the binding. And you wouldn't want to double it up or have a poor bind. You want to bind it well. And Jacka is really known for doing a lot of binding. Other whip makers will bind like all these layers and their bolsters all the way down, and really none of that's necessary. Joe does what you would call no binding. And this whip still on the side, let's see if we can pull backwards, you can still see has a strong 4 or 5 inches coming off of that. All right, and he is not using any binding whatsoever. Now, I do know he does lash some things down in certain areas, but lashing is different. Like when you put a yoke on a handle, you would lash it around, but you wouldn't need to bind that. And then up here around where the belly braid begins, you know, he'll do some lashing here that'll help with diameter to hold some things down and get a little bit of support, but it's not on the thong. Binding is usually referred to as binding on the thong. Now, I really don't think binding is necessary. I made my own Jacka model one time, and when I made the Jacka model I did to kind of replicate it, where it ends on an 8-plat fall hitch, I actually braided extremely tight for the same duration, and it still held as good as that without binding. Now, talking about the internals of Jacka, there are some whips we've taken apart. You can realize, I believe Joe coined it, or told me, he said Jacka was what's called a post-depression whip maker. He learned from a post-depression whip maker like Hill, and they would use every ounce and scrap of leather they'd have. He said if they found a piece of leather scrap on the floor, they'd find a way to get it up and put it inside of a whip. And if you ever took a Jacka whip apart, some of them, you'll find out that they're not always really double belly, double bolster. There'll be a good first belly, core bolster, whatever. But then he has different layers of bolster and different leather in these tapered strips that just get bound really well all the way down, which kind of gives the illusion of a second belly. Does it make him have a terrible flowing whip? It does not. I mean, Jacka is well known. But some of his constructions, I can't say, I've never taken every one part of his whips, but I have had some deconstructed where I've seen that, where It is a bound layer leather, after the belly. There's a few bound layers of leather in there that's bound. And, you know, you can do that. You know, I know other people that make an all bolster whip. They make a common whip where it's every bit like an Indiana Jones spec, but it's an all bolster, just different layer of bolsters that extend farther and farther to get the shape and then an overlay on it. Now, with this, like I said, you know, you don't need to bind. You know, I don't think anyone should bind. If it's your style to bind and you want to bind, well, that's okay. I mean, that's what you want to do. But it's not needed to have a strong transition in leather. It's not needed at all. And this Jacka, you know, I would say it's pretty thick, and it could be due to just what he did on the lower layers, you know, just how I bound it all. Because usually if I don't split anything I have from my leather to my cow, I'll come up with about 24 millimeters at a transition, not doing anything. Sometimes 25, but 24 is common. So he might have done something similar to that. But I've had Jacka whips that shocked me, and these might have been custom models, but he eventually made them fatter and fatter, and it wasn't a J series. But I easily had one before that was 29 millimeters at the transition. So, you know, it's just his style. As through the years, he did things differently. I believe when he was under a hill, he made them a lot more thinner and lighter. And through Morgan, when he was still sending him his way. But as he eventually started getting on his own, they just, like, as an evolution, they just get fatter and fatter and fatter. And the binding goes longer and longer to transition. And that was his style. And there's nothing wrong with that. But, you know, these are some good Indiana Jones whips to kind of take a look at. And I'm not sure exactly how I did it all. He may have just got a little handle flare by different things he did or how he attached the bolster. But what makes an Indy whip are several things. One, it would definitely be, well, on a pre-KOTCS, it'll be a 5/4 knot, you know, and then the 6-strand wrist loop. You know, Jacka made a longer wrist loop with a 4 strands, you know, and then he also used a 7/6, you know, for the knot. And, you know, in ways, I always think this is a superior knot, although I like the look of the 5/4. You know, it's just preference. You know, he'd always have a fatter transition out for different reasons, too. But this is basically the KOTCS is used by Indiana Jones, or the model based on it. But the way it's made is there's always a flare right there. And I talked about that in another video where that flare is important. You know, and as far as the 6-plat hitch, that's good up until KOTCS, where Jacka just did everything in an 8-plat. You know, the strand's got to be a little bit smaller at the end, you know, just a little bit smaller maybe. But with 8 of them, made a much stronger hitch, you know. So there's a lot of different things to explain the Indiana Jones look or feel. Some people say, well, it uses an 8-inch spike, or it uses these knots. And all that is part of the answer, but it's also not all of it. Internal construction is big. There are different methods of making whips. And if you're trying to make a Terry Jacka bullwhip, like, you know, you'd have to make it in Terry Jacka style in one way or the other, at least to replicate his work. I want to do it in his style, although I have made a replica of his in my own way. You know, and I'll mention that. Somebody wants something like that, I'll make something like for them. But, you know, I don't make the internals the same way. But the handle flare is important because that shows construction. I'm going to get some, I got a video coming up where people wanted me to talk about, show a Target whip versus Indiana Jones whip and how they're similar, how they're different. And I'll talk about construction as well, performance and things like that. You know, we can get in more detail with it. But overall, you know, although they try to credit Tom Hill with the Indiana Jones style, which, you know, he might have come up with the double belly format for Morgan to make it. You know, you could say that it was just Tom Hill, but Morgan did some things on his own. Like, Morgan was the one that thought of, I need to use something for a handle, and he just grabbed an 8-inch nail. Wherever he was laying around, he found it, he decided he'd use it. You know, just like that. The fact, if you're going to say the 8-inch nail spike, not a spring steel piece, okay? It can't be a spring steel. If you're trying to make it be an 8-inch spike, then you can't really say that was all Tom Hill. You know, that was David Morgan. You know, and at the end of the day, he also put that whip together and put the flare together and a lot of the things the way they work. You know, it's not like, you know, the wrist loop. I doubt Tom Hill's the first one to make a 6-strand wrist loop. So there's so much things you try to give people credit for, but there's so much things that are just timeless as well. You know, and as far, you know, as any whip over any other whip, you know, it's not the whip. It's really who makes it that's important. And you guys that have had little experience with multiple whips, I recommend finding a group of people or contact people to see who's in the area that has these whips and go see some of these whips in person. It's really good to kind of look at them and, you know, get a feel for them, you know, and just see like, oh, this guy's weight here, this guy's weight there. But to also just compare one whip you have, I've seen of one guy, isn't a fair assessment. Because like I said, if you saw that, you'd be like, Joe makes a very, very thin and streamlined whip for a Raiders. It was 22 or a little under 22 millimeters transition. But then you'll see another Raiders I'll show you, and it'll be 24. So you can't really judge because of variations and other stuff. But all these guys, we said before, they should have similar taper. Even this one, it tapers really fast to about the quarter mark, and then it slows down the rest of the way. It's pretty common on just helping with the economy of flow, the weight, the balance, things like that. And as far as different things, when it comes to making aerators, like I talked to Joe, and I do similar things, and he'll have certain models of aerators, or somebody be like, I want a certain look or spec, I want the knot so high, I want to try to replicate what I've seen for the aerators. He'll make that for you. But if you just order Indiana Jones, I think he called it his standard model, he'll just make an Indiana Jones whip his way, which is still very similar. But it's just, it's his way. He's not trying to hit certain specs or put this exactly where, exactly like 7.5 millimeters is right, or 7.5 inches is here or wherever. I mean, they don't really work about it. Or this has definitely got to be 22 millimeters, no more. He'll just make a really good bullwhip, a great whip for you. Just let the leather do its work. He'll be near the spec, but it'll be done his own way. When people are talking about who makes the best Indiana Jones, the closest one to Morgan, well, that's Morgan. That was it, only Morgan. I know Will Morgan and all them, and they've continued on the tradition, but, David, if you look at his whips, they changed a lot over the years, just whether, the placement of the handle, thicknesses here and there. He changed things, made knots differently. I think Del Carpio probably does the best job trying to replicate what Morgan did myself. I think he really does the best job. And there's little things about that from what I understand from his work, that do it just like how Morgan would have his knots done. Like there's a time in some of the Morgans, and I think you see evidence of this, but he would attach the lead over the core. So actually, I think unless I'm wrong, he'd have the lead wrapped already tightened on there, and then the core would attach right above where the lead is. So this isn't even biting on the lead, which even if you try to tack it in there, I mean, you could tighten it up with however, but even if you tack it, there's nothing to bite into, which is leather, which is lashed down. And that's sometimes eventually over time, you could feel the handle inside want to swivel around because it's just kind of lead that's gotten old or just loose and just kind of wants to swivel on the inside. And so unless, so some people would say, well, if you're not doing it that way, you're not making a David Morgan model whip, because it's not using where it is the lead in the core. And I personally think it's better to have it over the core, or actually after you already have maybe the second braided belly, attach it there, or over the bolster, attach it there. I think it helps the function and give you more meat to lock it in and get everything locked. You put on the lead and, you tighten it down and you tack it or staple it or whatever your method is. And then there's another thing, Morgan used tacks. All right. So if you use staples, is that, okay, that's not the Morgan method. I mean, there's a lot of things people, if you really want to look at the internal construction, which you never see, you can kind of argue what would make one thing more like a Morgan and more not. So at the end of the day, I personally say don't get too particular. You want an indie whip from a guy, do a good job, just buy the guy's stuff that you like, or see something you like, try it out. If he makes a good whip. I wouldn't be too worried about this cosplay angle. If you really are, they look to pay a lot of money for one that Morgan did make. But even Morgan would have variations. In the movies, he'd have, he had several whips in the movies for different lengths, and they were all a little different. They'd all be a little different, a little bit different shade here, a little different patina here, because this one's used more or not used. Or was that skin was just a darker skin because the kangaroo had more suntan or a longer life. I mean, you can't replicate something like you could with a molded machine. These are man-made, and this is also natural products, so there's some variation. Now, if you did want a certain spec, talk to your whip maker and just say, hey, can you do this? Are you willing to do this? What can you do for this? Or tell him definitely the one things you want to see from a whip, and then make sure if you don't know what you're talking about, try to discuss them to be like, does that make sense? Or what would this do? Or ask all the questions you want. If your whip maker, first of all, isn't willing to help answer your questions or work with you, well, he may not want to work with you or change too much. Like, you want my whip, buy my whip. That's fine. But he may not, he may not want to go off the grid too much. All right, well, don't use him unless you just want to try his stuff out. Try his stuff out, let him do it his way. Sometimes it's better to not try to tell the cook how to cook his food and just see if you like what the cook makes. If you like his flavor, great. If not, you go to a different restaurant from then on. Most of these guys want to work with you. So it's good to find a guy that'll work with you and try to hit your specs or figure out what you're liking. All those things can be, really good. I've passed on a couple orders, but I tend to try to do whatever I can do. But here's one thing. If you ask a whip maker questions and they really don't have a good answer for you, or the answer really is just not, they can't really explain it better or back it up or tell you the effect of what this is or why this was done, well, they don't necessarily need the knowledge to be a good whip maker. But but then again, it can also be kind of a warning sign if they can't explain why they're doing what they're doing. And, you know, you can't tell that it's from experience and conviction. You know, those are maybe some red flags. And I think if you can call a whip maker, talk to them, that is really awesome. Some of them are too busy, some of them can't, some of them you email more, that's great. Do it that way. But it's also, I think it's always really good to be able to talk to them. You got to feel for who they are as a person, because in the end of the day, art is just an extension of who you are and what you're doing. So I probably went off enough on this, but once again, my name is Blake Bruning, and this is a 8-foot Jacka J series. This is a 10-foot strain, which I'm thinking is a 28th anniversary model. If not, it was just straight Raiders. But these are some really excellent whips. I bought from a friend of mine that I've sold back and forth and bought from him back and forth. He really had some money issues, and he just needed some money fast, and he had this good deal, and I bought him. I'm not sure what I want to do with these just yet. I did help him out, and you know, I want to keep one of them. I'm just not sure which. You know, I'm a big strain fan, and you know, I don't know. I may end up finding a home for this Jacka, but it is a really good example of his work. And if you guys don't see a Jacka that often anymore, because he is retired, and people do try to hang on to these J series. So, you know, if I do sell it, you know, I hope it goes to a person that's a true J fan and really wants to take care of it. But God bless you. My name is Blake Bruning, Trinity Whip Company. Feel free to comment, and just whatever you want to comment about this, and I'll respond, or contact me directly. And if there is something you do want to see in a video, or maybe see something I might have you want me to take a video of, feel free to do. You have a wonderful day.